Hello friends! In today's video, I'm going to be sharing with you a non-exhaustive list of the things that I had to quit in Quasi. Now, the reason I say it's non-exhaustive is because there's lots and lots of things that I had to quit and change and challenge when I quit Quasi, when I committed to full recovery. However, I have been reflecting and I've sort of made a little list of some of the really key ones that made a significant difference in my journey from Quasi to full recovery. So I wanted to share those with you today. Firstly, I had to quit this conveyor belt existence. One of the things that I recognized very much when I was in my eating disorder was that I lived my life as a perpetual busy bee. It was as if my life was this conveyor belt where I would wake up and the day would just be this thing that rolled out ahead of me of, right, we get up, we do this, then we do it, then we do this, then we do this, then we do this, then we have this, then we get this and this and this, and then we have dinner, and then we do this and this, and then we stop, and then we go to sleep. And it would just be that constant conveyor belt existence. And when I committed to full recovery and to getting out of Quasi, something I very much had to do was spot where this conveyor belt was showing up and quit it. Quit the busy bee thing. I had to sit down. I had to let other people do things. I had to stop the cleaning that I had gotten very obsessive around. I had to stop being that person that jumped up to do all of the things, the washing up, the popping to the post office. I had to commit to actually doing the opposite of that conveyor belt existence, the opposite of that busy bee. I had to not set alarms. I had to lie in. Another thing was that I had to stop modifying orders. And if I was going to modify, the only thing I could do was add. Inside my eating disorder, I developed a habit of modifying orders. Whenever I went anywhere, it would seem that there was always something that I would do differently, have something on the side, have it like this, but without that. There just always seemed to be something that I would change, something that would be different, something that I'd ask for a bit less of, or something that I would swap out for something else, or something that I would have on the side. And actually, when I quit Quasi, I had to recognize that this again was disorder driven, whether it was directly restrictive or whether it was part of that pedestal of perfection and wanting something to be exactly perfect and not have anything on it that I even might not like. And that control and that rigidity, I had to recognize this was disorder. And actually the opposite of this was that commitment that I didn't modify anything. I had things as they came. And the only thing I was allowed to do was to add stuff. And actually when I was adding things, I was making sure that the things I was adding were very much disapproved by the eating disorder. So I'd add more cheese, I'd add more meat, that kind of thing. Just have days of absolutely nothing, weeks of absolutely nothing. I had to really focus my energy and attention on doing the opposite of that conveyor belt existence. And that for me was a really important thing when I quit Quasi. Another thing that I had to do in recovery was I had to commit to eating all meat. Now I understand that there may be some controversy around this, but this is me sharing my own personal things that I had to do. And this was something that was absolutely key for me. I had, inside my eating disorder, gone through various different stages of vegetarianism, pescatarianism. And when I recognized that I was quitting Quasi, I was eating chicken and I was eating turkey, but I always seemed to be avoiding and claimed all sorts of different reasons why that was, but I would always seem to be avoiding the red meat. And I had to drop that. I had to recognize that actually it was eating disorder who was in the driving seat of that decision and that action. And I had to very much re-welcome, which took forcing initially, very much forcing. I had to re-welcome all of those things back into my life. And the reason I say it took forcing is because I didn't spontaneously want those things. There was the odd thing that I thought, oh, I fancy a BLT. But a lot of the things I actually had to make myself have them, very much mechanically, very much forcefully. And by doing that, I actually was like, oh, these things are good. I like these things. Yes. Burgers. Yes. Lasagna. Yes. Spaghetti bolognese. Yes. Like so many different things that I was like, oh, okay. And some of the things I recognized, no, maybe this isn't my favorite thing, But I absolutely can eat it. And if someone was to serve it to me, I'm not going to say, oh, no, for X, Y, Z reason, I don't want to eat that, or, oh, I'll have the vegetarian option instead. No, I had to realise that resistance to red meat was my eating disorder. And for me, a very big thing in quitting Quasi was eating all meat again. Something else I had to do was to shelf a lot of the very fun but active hobbies that I had discovered and picked up and was enjoying. This included climbing, mountaineering, hiking, mountain biking. I actually had to put those things on a shelf. And what I mean by that is I had to commit to the fact that at the moment, at that time, they were not serving my purpose of getting fully and completely free. And this was very much from that neural rewiring perspective. I think often exercise and stepping back from exercise and prioritizing rest can be framed very much as tools to help and enable that nutritional rehabilitation, but actually they are critical in the neural rewiring as well. If you have any degree of compulsivity around movement, and that can be formal exercise, it can be lower level movement, it can also be productivity, there is a need to put those things on a shelf so that you can rewire your brain and get rid of that compulsivity. And for me, in recovery, when I was quitting Quasi, absolutely what I had to do was put a lot of the things that I loved, that core me absolutely loved. I had to say not now. I had to make that formal commitment to myself that actually this was a time to be putting those things on a shelf. And as I moved through that journey and was making progress, getting closer to being fully free, I did slowly begin to reintroduce those things. But as I did that, the focus was entirely on fun and socializing. And I was firm with myself that actually there was no pushing myself in a physical way. And actually that wasn't something that I began to do until I was fully recovered. Another thing I had to do when I quit Quasi was to write down a list of all of the things I supposedly didn't like. And I'm talking about food and drink here. Make a list of all the foods and the drinks I supposedly didn't like, and then make my way through them. And not just once, but actually to take each of those things and repeatedly try them. Get that repetition, get that consistency, attack that list. And you know what was fascinating? When I did that, the vast majority of things on that list I did like. In fact, some of them I absolutely loved. But the vast majority, as I say, I liked them. And the only reason they were on that don't like list is actually because they were disapproved by the eating disorder for various different reasons. So getting honest with myself about the stuff that I supposedly didn't like and making myself try those things multiple times was absolutely crucial in me quitting Quasi. This next one covers a wide variety of individual things, but in general, I had to stop the OCD behaviours that had become very much a part of my day-to-day life in Quasi. This included, as I say, a wide variety of individual things, but a handful of those were I had to stop with the obsessive cleaning that had become part of my lower level movement, my productivity compulsivity. I had to disengage from it. I had to radically change the way in which I even lived in my home. I had to change up the regularity at which I was hoovering, dusting, changing sheets. I had to let other people do things. I had to be the one that would sit down whilst other people washed up. I had to let other people do the washing up. I had to let other people run errands and do jobs. I suppose in some ways this overlaps a little bit with the getting off that conveyor belt existence. But very much I had to challenge those more OCD style behaviors that are very much part of the energy deprived brain and the impact that being in a starved state can have. You know, we often see inside an eating disorder, OCD style behaviors coming to the surface. And for me, very much these presented with cleaning and obsessiveness around cleanliness and tidiness. They also very much showed up with odd things like I got funny about the food I was eating being hot. I'd get very iffy If, say, it was a takeaway and it turned up and it was just a bit cold, I would practically nuke it in the microwave. Same with meals that were served. I just got into this very obsessive pattern of needing food to be really hot if I was eating it, or if it was going to be something like ice cream, it would need to be like exactly the right temperature. And when I look at it, it was very much restrictively driven. But that obsessiveness, that rigidity, that control, those behaviours were things that I absolutely had to address, and I had to address them through the opposite actions. I had to sit down and eat mildly warm takeaway. I had to make myself eat things even though they weren't at that temperature that felt like it was the right temperature to eat it at. I had to do the opposite. Another thing that comes up with this is my resistance to eating in a non-perfect environment. So there was a lot of challenging that I did of this in the very early stages of my recovery, and I made great progress with that. But I did notice, in terms of that quasi rut I was stuck in, this is something that had sort of snuck back in. And it might have been a little more subtle than in earlier parts of my recovery, but it was still very present. I wanted odd jobs to be done. I wanted people to be kind of sat down all together and eating together. I wanted certain television shows on whilst I was eating. It really annoyed me if the washing machine was on whilst we were eating. It really annoyed me if I was sat eating and then suddenly someone phoned or someone came in and started just talking to me when I was living in a house share environment. I noticed all of these things and very much had to apply those opposite actions again and challenge myself to eat in chaotic, imperfect environments. Something else I had to do in recovery that was absolutely crucial to me getting out of quasi was to stop prioritizing my career and my education, and to instead recenter and reprioritize recovery. This one might be a little bit more specific to my journey, but because it was such an important thing, I simply had to include it in this list. It was imperative that regardless of the fact that my core self was passionate about finding and pursuing a career that was something that I loved, that was something that energized me, that I actually had to recognize that that moment when I was quitting quasi was not the time for that. And that actually this was another thing I almost had to put on a shelf. I had to accept that actually this was not the time in my life to be pushing on my career front, pushing education-wise. This was a time to be putting recovery at the very top of the pile. And on reflection, when I look back, I can see that this was crucial for me to, one, get fully recovered, and two, be able to put my career first and be able to pour all of my energy and attention into pursuing a path that feels fully aligned to my core self. It's that thing that I know I've said a few times on this channel, that the you who prioritizes recovery in the now is the you who is prioritizing everything else in your life for the rest of your life. And finally, I had to stop believing my own BS. I had to. I know that when I honestly committed to quitting quasi, something that was imperative in that process was being really brutally honest with myself about the reality of where I was, being brutally honest about where eating disorder and restriction was showing up. I had to stop believing my own BS. I had to stop going down those pathways of excuses and reasons and dilemmas and this and that of why I didn't like that, or I couldn't do this, or why that wasn't really what I wanted in that moment, and oh, but it is what I'd like to do the most, so I am going to modify this here, and oh, but I really love going climbing, so that's what I am going to go and do. And I had to stop believing my own BS. I had to get brutally honest with myself that I wasn't free, that I very much still had an active eating disorder. And yes, I could look backwards and see that I had made progress. Yes, things were in places better than they had been previously, but I had to make myself look forwards. I had to make myself think about that place where I was fully and utterly free. That place where there was no eating disorder. And I had to get honest about the fact that that was not where I was at the moment. And that wasn't because that destination wasn't possible, but it was because I was choosing to hold hands with the eating disorder in various different ways and places. And so I had to get honest about what I needed to do to close the gap between where I was and that place where I was fully free. And I had to commit to doing the work to close that gap. And this is why stopping believing my own BS and getting brutally honest with myself was absolutely critical in me quitting Quasi and therefore getting to a place where I was and am fully eating disorder free. So that brings us to the end of this video. I hope that this has been helpful. As I say, it's very much a short version of a much bigger list, but these are some of the main things that on reflection I see as big players in my journey of quitting Quasi. So I hope that this has been helpful. If there's anything I've brought up in this video today that you'd like me to talk about a bit more or explore further, please let me know in the comments below. Otherwise, wherever you are, whatever you're doing, I hope that you have a wonderful day, and I look forward to speaking to you next time.